Good afternoon and welcome to this episode of Alliance Live. I'm Francesca Vaghi. I am a Senior Development Officer at the Alliance working in the Children and Young People program, and I'm delighted to introduce my colleague Allan Faulds, who is our Policy and Information Officer in the policy team. Hi, Allan.
Hi, Francesca. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And we are here today to discuss the legislative process in Scotland. And the reason why we thought it'd be important to record this episode is because you may have seen headlines around the National Care Service Bill coming soon into effect. And we thought our members and wider public would benefit from a bit of an explainer of what the legislative process in Scotland is actually like. So thank you so much, Allan, for lending us your expertise on this matter.
No problem.
I appreciate it, and I'm sure many of us, of our listeners will. Before we begin, I thought it'd be important maybe to mention something around how Scottish Parliament versus the Westminster Parliament works and the evolution. So
of course, the Scottish Parliament has quite a lot of responsibility for what I'd call the day-to-day things, the things that really affect us in our sort of daily lives in Scotland. And the UK Parliament has sort of more high-level things for the most part, and the two parliaments do work quite differently. So today we'll mostly be talking about the Scottish Parliament and the process there, just because that's the thing that's most relevant.
Yep. Perfect. And on that note, perhaps you can tell us, how does a bill start? So the initiation process of a bill.
Yeah, so there's multiple ways that a bill can come to the Scottish Parliament, but 99% of cases it will be either the government or an individual MSP has decided that they want to write a bill, to write a new law to achieve something. And they will sort of write a proposal of what they want that law to do, what they want it to achieve, and how it would achieve that. And they can often sort of put forward different options. Like, we could do it this way, we could do it that way. And they'll put that out in a consultation document that will go out to the public and to sort of interested experts, people who have knowledge in that field, usually for a period of about 3 months or so. And that will then come back, and the government or the MSP will analyse it, see what the responses were. And it's really important to understand that a consultation is not a referendum. It's not about how many people support or oppose something. It's about why they support or oppose it. So it's very much a strength of argument rather than a strength of numbers. And after that, then they can begin the process of bringing it to the Parliament.
Great. And before we move on to that stage one, can you tell us a bit about the types of bills that go through this process?
Yeah, so a government bill, basically, there's a bit of a difference here. The government can lodge a bill at any point. Because it's the government, it basically has the right to suggest laws, so it can bring one at any time. If an individual MSP wants to bring a law, once they've done this sort of consultation phase, they have to get the support of a number of other MSPs in the Parliament, and they also have to get a number of MSPs from different parties. So it would take up a lot of Parliament's time if any MSP could propose a law any time they wanted, and also if people were able to just back laws from their own party, that would waste a lot of time and stuff that might not have parliamentary support. So once there's a private member's bill, that has to get support across multiple parties and multiple MSPs.
Okay, thank you. Then stage one has two parts. There's the committee process, including call for views and an opportunity to get involved. And can you tell us a bit more about that, and then I'll ask you some follow-up questions. Yeah,
so when a bill first comes to the Scottish Parliament, the Parliament will decide one of its committees to sort of lead on the scrutiny of that bill. So in the case of the National Care Service Bill, it's the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee. That's the remit it falls under. And a committee's job in general is to sort of scrutinise what the government's doing, and also to scrutinise laws and see, are these going to be good laws? Will they be effective? Will they achieve the aims they're meant to achieve? So it will open up a process initially of a call for views, which I suppose is kind of like another round of consultation.
Yes, and why does that happen if their consultation has already taken place in the initiation of the bill?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think especially on the subject of the National Care Service, a lot of disabled people, in particular people who've been receiving care, have been telling their stories over and over and over again for years, and there can be a little bit of a worry that they're being asked to do so again. And it's important to understand that this is sort of a different stage in the process, that the consultation before the bill comes forward is about the ideas. Like, they're thinking about, well, this is what we could do. The call for views in the committee is about the law as it's actually written. So that then could have changed compared to the consultation. They could have taken some of the ideas on board. They could be doing it a different way. And it's kind of your opportunity to go, well, if this is what the law is actually going to look like, what do you think about that? So it's a slightly different kind of consultation. And once that's complete, they'll also, the committee will take in evidence from experts. So they'll have those experts come into Parliament sit before the committee, and committee members will ask them questions about specific details of the bill and whether or not they think it'll achieve its aims, and what things are good, what things might be bad about it. So it's quite a sort of detailed process. And after that, they'll produce a report. That report goes to the whole Parliament, and then the Parliament as a whole, so all 129 MSPs, get to vote on the bill, on sort of the principles of the bill. So they might not think the bill's perfect, but they might think, well, we agree with what it's trying to achieve, and if they pass it at stage 1, it then moves on to the next stage in the process.
Perfect. And so that's stage 2, a return to the committee for detailed scrutiny, amendments, and vote on the amended bill. So can you talk us a bit through that?
Yes, I mean, that's kind of sort of that in a nutshell. So it comes back to the committee, and the committee look at it in real detail now. So they're really going through it with like a fine-tooth comb. They're finding all the things about it, and what they think of each of those points. And there's an opportunity for any MSP to submit an amendment, so to sort of change any provision of the law, so they can insert new things into it. They can try and delete things from the law. But at this stage, only the MSPs on the committee get to vote on those amendments. So there's an opportunity here for sort of a bit of lobbying. If you've identified something you think should change in a law, you can sort of try and get an MSP in the committee or you can try and get an MSP to submit an amendment and get the committee to vote for it by emailing those MSPs, and you often see that happen a lot. Once they've finished that process of sort of amendments, if they've accepted them, they will do a sort of another version of the bill, and the committee will vote on it with all those amendments, and if that passes, it then moves on to the next stage.
Which is the whole Parliament stage. And then, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the whole Parliament stage is kind of it's like the chaotic phase, because it's got amendments, but this time not only can any MSP put in an amendment, but any MSP can vote on them. So the whole Parliament's voting on amendments, especially on really big pieces of legislation. And you could imagine the National Care Service is going to be a big piece of legislation. You can end up with loads and loads of amendments. The COVID recovery bill we just had, Parliament was meeting until 10 o'clock. Voting in amendments to that. The Scottish Parliament normally finishes about 5:30, 6 o'clock, so it was a really, really busy process. And once they've got all of those amendments through, or if they've accepted any of those in that stage, it then once again goes to a vote of the whole Parliament. And at this point, this is sort of the final vote on the bill as amended by its various stages, taking into account all of the stuff that people have fed in. And remember, because they can do amendments in stage 3, again, there's an opportunity there for a bit of sort of lobbying and weighing in and trying to get MSPs to support things. Once all of that's complete, the Parliament just takes a final vote on the whole law, whether they'll pass it or not. And if a majority vote in favour of it, then in theory that's it. It becomes a law after that point.
Fantastic. And then there's kind of 2 final legal steps, the royal assent and then commencement.
Yeah, so it's not that Parliament passes a bill and it becomes a law and that's it. The next day the law applies in full. It has to first of all get something called royal assent, where basically the monarch agrees that the law should be passed. Now this is basically a formality by this point. A monarch hasn't refused royal assent since I think 1708, so over 300 years. Obviously the monarch is not a political figure, so they don't get to make these decisions, but it's like a lingering relic of how we do things. And then there's also what they call the commencement phase. So the government might decide that this part of the law is going to come into effect in 6 months' time. It might decide that this isn't coming into place for a couple of years. They'll often do other pieces of legislation called regulations, which are a bit sort of more technical and more detailed, but don't require as much sort of parliamentary time, and they'll sort of work through those. So that then sort of is the final steps in making sure that the bill, which has then become an act, an actual law, then sort of takes effect.
Okay. And we were discussing in preparation for today's episode a bit about how a bill can get passed and get royal assent, but doesn't come into effect. And the example that we were thinking of in particular is the UNCRC Incorporation Bill. Can you tell us a bit about why that might happen?
Yeah, so just for context, the UNCRC is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Scottish Parliament passed a law sort of at the end of the previous session, finishing in 2021, to bring sort of aspects of that convention into Scots law, and it was then subject to a court challenge. So what that meant is, although it had been passed by Parliament, it was sort of it was going to become an act, it couldn't actually come into effect until that court case had been resolved. And what actually the court case said that some aspects of it weren't in the Scottish Parliament's powers, because of course it's devolution, so the Scottish Parliament can only do certain things. And what's had to happen now is it's come back to the Scottish Parliament for what's called a reconsideration stage, where basically the government will make and propose some more amendments to then make sure that the final law is in line with the Scottish Parliament's powers. So that's been like a really sort of dramatic moment, because we've never really had that happen before. But it does show that sometimes even getting that final step of royal assent and getting it signed into law doesn't mean it comes into effect, because the courts can still sort of, as they should be able to in a democracy, sort of check that all things are sort of correct and in line with the law.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm sure as many of our viewers will know, the Alliance often hosts events to kind of cover consultations, as we did, for example, with the National Care Service. Is there anything in particular that you would suggest to our listeners and to anyone that's interested in taking part in consultation processes? What's like the key thing that one should do to take part in a meaningful way?
So to take part meaningfully, as I said, it's not a numbers game. So it's not about just responding and saying, well, I don't want this to happen or I do want this to happen. It's make sure that you've got good arguments. So if you want something to happen, make sure you explain why you want that, or if you're against it, explain why. And often if it's a complex piece of legislation, you'll find that organisations like ourselves, organisations that might have sort of specialities in that, will often have their own ideas, and they might have some guidance on how you can respond to the consultation. So it's often useful to look at their sort of websites and see if there's anything where they've sort of pre-produced that you can then use in your own response. That means that you're not having to, if you're not a policy expert, you're still allowed to input, and you can use sort of other people's expertise. And also, if you're even a bit unsure about that, an organisation like the Alliance, we often ask our members for direct input. So if we are sort of responding to consultation, we'll put it on our website, and you can email us with any of your own thoughts, and we'll try and include them in our response too. Thank you. Is there anything in addition to all of this that you would like to say before we say goodbye? No, hopefully that's been a sort of a useful explanation of what is like. It's quite a technical process, getting a new law made, but obviously it's quite important how our democracy functions. So hopefully that's useful to our members to sort of understand that a bit more. Yeah, I'm sure it will be. It was very useful for me. So thank you again. Thank you so much.